Surely a king would know his best should he warn, clothed that his people might receive him well. Yet though wrapped in suffering is this one adorned as a hero of Israel. Surely a king in lavish grandeur would live, placed on a high and awesome throne to dwell. But here not a place to
Good evening. Thanks for tuning in to our live stream study of the book of Matthew here with Curtis Pittman and Nick Westberg. Curtis is back with us from his travels last week, but again, we want to emphasize how grateful we were that Brother Greg Knight, one of our elders here, was able to fill in, and we have many talented teachers in the congregation. Sally, with COVID and stuff going on, not all of them are able to use their talents all the time, so maybe we'll introduce some more into this study as the weeks go on.
It was incredibly encouraging. I mean, the what we see, the role of elders filling in the New Testament is exactly what our elders do at this congregation, and it was awesome. And Greg had some awesome insights into Matthew and into beyond. He even put up James, and then talk about some other aspects of Jesus and how we react to the story and how we react similar to the disciples. So it was really encouraging.
Yes, absolutely.
To hear Greg's insights and to see him in that role. I mean, like you said, he teaches on a regular basis in that teaching rotation, but normally I'm outside that.
Yeah.
And it was really encouraging.
Well, and then if you're logging into our Zoom class too, Kenny and Jim both too as well. All of our elders make an effort to teach in that environment, so you're not just hearing Nick, Cliff, and Curtis lecture all the time. That sharing there is definitely beneficial.
Try to make it a conversation, but then it turns into Cliff preaching. I'm just kidding.
We had an excellent discussion last week on the Zoom class. It was a very encouraging discussion, really in depth.
We're missing a few people,
but we're getting into this. This is a section of Scripture that just hits us and hits us so hard, and as a result, it's encouraging that we have as much discussion.
Oh, very true, yeah. We had good questions, good comments, like I said, good insight from our elders and our members. And really, too, as you view this is not designed to be us just teaching this crowd.
No.
You're getting a window into us learning this text as we go, and we're learning together.
I mean, we're learning outside, but also when we come here, we're
sharing and learning,
sharpening and...
This isn't three people lecturing. This is a conversation of us talking about our studies of the book.
It's easier to listen to a conversation about something than it is to listen to somebody lecture.
Yeah. And full disclosure, we should probably do more prep work off camera prior to hitting record to just vet out the plan and the direction of the class. But this is more just thinking out loud and having that conversation. It's just like, I don't know, the disciples getting together and discussing the teachings of Jesus at the same time.
Yeah.
I mean,
and I love that idea.
This stuff is so important. I mean, I can't emphasize enough that what we're studying, I mean, this is a first-hand account of somebody who actually lived during the time of Jesus. I mean, that's amazing, And so when we're looking at this stuff, it's so important that we see the people within the narrative.
Yeah. Well, then, we're going to pick up then tonight in Matthew chapter 26, and I know all of you that are probably tuned in now have been with us for a while, but we've been going through this magnificent book, a biography of Jesus, as Nick mentions, of an eyewitness, one of his very disciples who heard him preach, records how he is the promised Messiah and evidence for that, and how we should obey him and bear fruit for him. Well, we left off in verses 26 through 29. Last week with Jesus instituting the Lord's Supper. Right before that, he tells us that Judas is going to betray him. And then he leaves with that statement in verse 29 that he's going to drink it anew with us in the Father's kingdom. So let's pick up then verse 30, Matthew chapter 26. It says, after singing a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. And kind of just a segue there too. I love this early Christian assembly. Now, I know they're not called Christians yet. This is prior to the full institution of the church, but they got together. They spent time with Jesus. They celebrated the Lord's Supper, and they sung a hymn. And I just think it's kind of the simplicity of that is beautiful. But it says, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Then Jesus said to them, "You will all fall away because of me this night. For it is written, I will strike down the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have been raised, I will go ahead of you to Galilee." So now we have a stark prediction, don't we? He's already mentioned Judas betraying him. We know that he's about to be arrested and killed and all of that. We know from our previous studies. But yet, now he tells them, you're all going to fall away from me. What are your thoughts on that?
Here's Jesus, showing them the chain reaction of events that are going to take place, right? We're looking at the last chapter we spent looking at the responses of these different people that, the disciples of the different people that were around Jesus and who he encountered and things like that. But we're also seeing the chain reaction of things that are happening. Jesus does this, his disciples respond this way. They take the Lord's Supper, they respond this way. And Jesus is trying to help them understand, look, this is going to happen.
Yeah,
I'm going down.
Yeah.
And you need to know that you're going to fall away because of me.
Yeah, and before we get to the specific prophecy too in this, just that idea of you're going to fall away, I think it's you, Nick, that's been emphasizing we need to see ourselves in this story. Mm-hmm. How would we respond? We'd probably be maybe one of those people that we're going to fall away.
That's an awesome point.
What would cause them to fall away? Now, we know that Jesus is going to go to the cross. I think we can maybe assume that a lot of it was their misunderstanding about what the kingdom was going to be like. It could be their misunderstanding what Jesus is supposed to do. And the fact that their Lord is going to die, it seems like we're going to lose.
Well, think about movements that have happened over just the last, 30 or 40 years.
Yeah.
And then think about the leaders of those movements. When the leaders of those movements have done a good job at creating an atmosphere where people are really into it, they're following and they're going somewhere, that movement sticks around. But here, when a leader dies, it doesn't have the same emphasis, it doesn't have the same drive as it once did, and the people who were close to that leader, that individual, are not as gung-ho about it.
Well, especially if the leader claims to be divine.
Right, and when you look at Jesus, that's what's happening, is the disciples have spent 3.5 years with Jesus, sitting around, talking to him, learning from him, and watching him teach and do miracles, and all the things that they've seen when they've been around Jesus. Jesus says, I'm going to die, I'm going to go to the cross, I'm going to be killed by my own people.
Yeah.
And the disciples are like, you're crazy. And here it is, it's happening all at one time, this chain reaction, again, of events. And the disciples still don't believe it's going to happen.
So Jesus is going to go to the cross, Jesus is going to die, and they're going to fall away. Mm-hmm. And then it's a fulfillment of this prophecy from Zechariah, as Curtis mentioned before we started here. I will strike down the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. Well, why do you think he keeps drawing to this Zechariah passages, Curtis, or any prophecies?
I have no idea why Zechariah is especially highlighted, especially towards the end of Matthew. But Matthew is not hesitant to call on Old Testament scriptures. And so if we go back and look at what we feel the purpose of Matthew is, and it is to appeal to a mainly Jewish audience to prove to them that Jesus is the Messiah. And he does that by showing the prophecies that Jesus fulfills. And so these callbacks to Zechariah are an indication that Jesus is fulfilling this prophecy. Yeah. Not only has he referred to himself as the Son of Man, but here he's referring to himself in a backhand way of being the shepherd.
Yeah.
And if you can remember back, the good shepherd that he is.
Right. So a Jewish person who is familiar with prophecies, although we look at this and go, I wouldn't get the Messiah out of that. They had ones that they referred to as messianic prophecies, and there's also ones that Jesus shows that were messianic that maybe they didn't even understand.
Right.
And here he tells, I want to be a fulfillment of this prophecy. Then he says, but after I've been raised. So he predicts his death, he predicts his betrayal, he predicts that they're going to fall away from him, and he predicts his resurrection. I will go ahead of you to Galilee. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to meet you there later.
Which is interesting, like you guys discussed last week, that we see at the beginning of Matthew 26, that it's the first time that Jesus defines how he's going to die. It's been suffering text after suffering text after suffering text, right? This, I think, might be the 11th or the 12th one that we see, but included in this, after striking the shepherd, is he'll be raised.
I'll be raised.
And it's interesting, but it's kind of mind-boggling and anxiety-inducing that Jesus understands that I am going to suffer, I am going to die, I'm going to die by crucifixion, but I will be raised. But then what do we want to see before we get to this end of this chapter? He still pleads with God to take this away from me. And so while we'll probably discuss more shortly, but it's just that he has this intellectual knowledge of what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Yet we still see the emotional pull,
there's a conflict in a sense. So Jesus tells him that he's going to die. He tells him that you're going to fall away, which we assume because of Jesus dying, but he's going to be raised. So they shouldn't fall away because he's going to be raised. But the prophecy says that they're going to fall away. It's kind of what it says. So then he goes on, or it says verse 33, but Peter said to him, in typical Peter fashion, I'm going to tell Jesus what I'm feeling. He says, even though all may fall away because of you, I will never fall away. Great attitude, Peter. That's great. We should all have that same attitude. Yeah. Jesus said to him, truly I say to you, this very night before a rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And poor Peter. I mean, think about it. I will never deny you. Jesus goes, hey, guess what? By the end of tonight, you're going to deny me.
And as much humility as we see in the character of Peter, prior to Jesus' resurrection, we do see Peter's kind of arrogant side here where he's saying, look, I'm your number one. Like, they're going to all fall away. I'm still going to be here following you, Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I would assume a negative tone.
No, I don't think it's necessarily negative. I think, but it's showing Peter's character and what he thinks of himself in relation to Jesus. And so, although we see a humble character, of Peter, Peter's the one that speaks out. Peter's the one that's bold. Peter's the one that's speaking up and saying things. The other disciples are kind of keeping quiet. And so that's why Peter kind of sees himself in a leadership position in relationship to Jesus. He says this because he probably thinks that Jesus is going to be impressed with this, or
and I think you're right on, because it's while we don't have the time to dig into a character study of Peter, but it's interesting to see Peter before Jesus' arrest, Peter after Jesus' arrest, Peter after Jesus' death. But I mean, you have to tie into John on that, but you could just kind of see that Peter's just falsely building himself up almost, because but we see all the air's let out of his balloon at the end of John's gospel, because he just goes back to life as it was before Jesus. And so it's a sad tale of leadership, but it's also one that is encouraging because he learns from it, as we see in Acts. But we need to, as Christians, it's so easy for us to say that, well, if I have a gun to my head, I will never deny Jesus. I will never do that. But maybe we're also just trying to build ourselves up with this bravado, that doesn't have the substance behind it, similar to Peter.
I can see that, kind of, not just a zealous ignorance, but a zealous, an ignorant arrogance.
A naive zealousness.
He really believes in his cause. He really believes Jesus is going to, because you look at 26:69, where Jesus is encountering now the chief priests and scribes, and they're coming at Jesus with clubs and swords, and here comes Peter out of the woodworks. We know it's Peter because we look at John, right? Peter comes out of the woodworks with this sword. And he pulls
he's ready to die with Jesus.
He cuts off the ear. He is ready. I mean, there's nothing false about what Peter says, but Peter misinterprets who Jesus is. Not to say that we too wouldn't misinterpret who Jesus is, but he believes in his cause. He believes so much so in his cause that he's willing to act on it.
He definitely is going to back up his friend, as we're going to see here in a bit.
And then when Jesus lays down and submits to these guys,
Peter falls away. Because he doesn't do what Peter wanted him or thought he should do. Very good point. Well, let's continue then. It says, Jesus says, verse 35, Peter says, even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you. All the disciples said the same thing too. So we have recorded Peter's responses. Probably maybe he's the first one to do it, I would say. But
Peter's the ringleader.
Everybody else is saying, they were all going, same thing. That kind of idea. So then verse 36.
Just to interject, a comment that you made in your sermon a couple weeks ago on the Christian and politics. You mentioned, and we're going to see it, not get to it tonight, but Nick alluded to the cutting off of Malchus's ear, that violence. And when there was a fight, if there was ever a fight that a Christian should participate in the history of time, it's to defend Jesus. And what does Jesus say?
Put it away.
Put it away. And so right now in our political turmoil, we see, and I don't want to repeat your sermon. It was an excellent sermon. It's available on our YouTube page, Facebook page, and podcast. But it's just that we oftentimes want to take the same reaction as Peter. And the ground that we are wanting to fight for is nothing compared to what Peter's saying here. Yeah. But Jesus still comes back and says, it's not worth it.
It's not worth it. Well, verse 36, it says, Then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane. And from what I understand, this is kind of like a Central Park olive grove in the area, and you can visit it even today. But a place called Gethsemane. And he said to his disciples, Sit here while I go over there and pray. Now, there's not as much emphasis on Jesus going off and praying alone in Matthew as maybe there is in some of the other Gospels, but it is there. And we often see these moments where Jesus turns to quiet contemplation and prayer during difficult times. And I think there's a great example there for us. Before we go into what he's praying for, he just said, I'm going to die, and you're going to all leave me. So he goes to prayer. That's his go-to in a time of trial.
I mean, think about what you do in times of turmoil. When something bad happens, our automatic reaction, if we're people of faith, is let's go to the higher power and see what he can do about it. Which is what we should be doing all the time, but we don't always do that. We kind of have this self image of, well, we can
I can do it on my own.
And when I need God, then I'll go to him. But here's Jesus. Nothing's happened to him yet. There's nothing that has happened to him other than that he's predicted his death. He's done the Last Supper. He's coming to this culmination of events. And here he is right before he's going to be arrested and taken and put on trial. And he's in a garden, like you said, quiet contemplation. Yeah. He's praying to God.
But he doesn't also turn to, and I know he's the Lord, he wouldn't do that, but he doesn't turn to various vices or sins or temptations in these times. He doesn't turn to a sword like Peter does.
Right.
He turns.
And we got to understand, Jesus is a human. Jesus is a human. Yeah. As much as he is God, he's a human. And we're seeing that the humanity of Jesus in chapter 26 especially. We're seeing the human in Jesus come out more than we have in the rest of the story. And I think this is showing the emotional side of Jesus and the passion for his work and what he's been doing for the people in his world.
Well, so he tells his disciples, sit here, so stay here while I go over there to pray. And he took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee and began to be grieved and distressed. So some of the disciples over there, he takes the three that he's closest to with him, and he's grieved and he's distressed. And then he said to them, my soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. Remain here and keep watch with me. This is a cry out for compassion, for understanding, for empathy from your best friends. And Jesus says, I'm grieved to the point of death. And not that I feel like I'm going to die, but we say that sometimes. I feel like I'm dying. It is stressful. There's all of this.
I kind of almost picture an anxiety attack. And it's interesting that Jesus set his disciples down, which I don't know how many there were, but then he grabs Peter, James, and John to go a little bit further. He needed that support. And here he confides in them that he is anxious. He's so anxious that it's near the point of death. Yeah. And so, which just makes what they do even more, almost of a betrayal.
Yes.
Because he takes the time to confide in them and saying that I need prayer right now because I am sorrowful to the point of death. Remain here and watch.
Yeah. He's having anxiety. I mean, we read in other passages how the sweat became as blood coming down and all of that. And this is, some people end up going to the hospital when they have anxiety attacks because they think they're having a heart attack, right? But here Jesus is grieved and he needs his friends there with him. And he asked them to keep watch with me. And in verse 39, he went on beyond them and he fell on his face in prayer. So I picture this emotional collapse.
I think I see in my mind's eye that just I can't do it anymore. I'm just
boom. Yeah. So he falls on his face and he prays. So Jesus, when he's at this lowest point of stress and anxiety and worry and fear and all of that, what he does is he falls down and prays. And here's what he prays: Father, If it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will.
Wow.
So his prayer is to not suffer like he's about to. Previously he passed out a cup and said, drink from it all you. This is my blood that's going to be poured out. Now he's asking for that same cup to be taken away, of his blood being poured out. That cup of suffering that he's going to be dealing with. He says, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will. So his desire is to not suffer, but yet he knows that he has to suffer. The fulfillment of prophecies, he already said he's going to. How do we reconcile this?
Again, I think what alluded to a couple minutes ago, I don't know if it's fair to say that this is what it is, but it's almost like the transition from an intellectual knowledge to a purely spiritual, emotional knowledge. It's a realization that I've been saying this stuff, trying to build myself up, but now this is it. It's here. It's coming. I have been able to mentally prepare, try to spiritually prepare, emotionally prepare, but now is the time, and I don't want to do it.
Yeah, I think also we're seeing. See if I can articulate this.
What would you, while you're thinking about that, maybe we need to ask this question. What would, if you were in the position of Jesus, you know you're going to die, you know you're going to be betrayed by your own people, how would you feel?
Yeah, like this.
What would you do?
That's kind of what I want us to see here, is that we often make excuses. We'll tell somebody, hey, Jesus did this, you should be like Jesus. And they go, yeah, but he's the Son of God. We see here that he deals with the exact same emotions and feelings that we do.
Yes.
He had the literal weight of the entire world on his shoulders right now.
Yeah. So it's not just, well, he's Jesus, so he could do it. I see human emotions here. Yes, he's 100% God, but he's also 100% man. Yeah. Is the best way I've seen it articulated.
He's not a robot, a figurative robot we've cooked up within words of a text. He was a real person who really lived. Why would we be talking about this event 2,000 years after it happened if it wasn't important?
And he pleads with God.
Yeah.
But he does it still with humility.
Yes.
Extreme humility. And it's humility that is hard to pray with. Just in my experience, it's hard to add this, not as I will, but you will.
Because oftentimes the reason we pray is because we want our will done.
Yes.
And to say, your will be done might mean that I don't get what I want.
Yeah,
that is very true. So you see this resolve of Jesus here too. Yet not as I will, but as you. Jesus always is about the Father's will. And he came to his disciples. So he obviously got up and went to them, maybe to lean upon them for comfort and at that time. And he found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, the one who said, I'd die with you, right?
Okay. Where's that energy?
Yeah. So you men could not keep watch with me for 1 hour? You couldn't give me 1 hour to just stay up with me? And keep watching and praying that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Peter's spirit was willing. Remember earlier? Yep. I die with you, Jesus, but he can't even stay awake because his flesh is weak.
It's the two, and I think it goes to show the contrast, even between Jesus and between his flesh and his spirit, the conflicting contrast that we see, that the spirit is willing to go to the cross, but he doesn't want to die. And it's the same thing that he's telling Peter. Right?
In thinking out loud, is it that he doesn't want to die? Is it this cup of suffering? Does he just want to go straight to the cross? Does he not want to go through this emotional anguish and burden? What is the cup that he's asking to be passed?
There's been speculations for the millennia about that. And to me, I think it's more than just he doesn't want to deal with the pain. Because Jesus had ability to do that. We hear of martyrs in the New Testament and even afterwards who dealt with the pain. I think it's more. When Jesus is on the cross, and I don't want to skip ahead, but he cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And you mentioned bearing the weight of the sin of the entire world. I think there's something there. Yeah. Jesus at one moment is going to have all the sins of all humanity on him as a sacrifice. And at that moment, he cannot be in the relationship with his Father anymore. At least that's the way I look at it. Yeah. Because God the Father can't be in the relationship with sin. And now he and the Father have always been one. But at this moment on the cross, he's going to be alone.
Separated.
Now, we always talk about the Trinity and all of that. There's a oneness there. The Lord God is one, the great Shema, that passage, the Hebrews would say. Mm-hmm. And at that moment, he's no longer one with God. Maybe I'm overthinking, but that's how I see it here. He knows that's coming upon him.
Which, if that is the case, and I can see why that would be the case, would that not elicit this anxiety?
Oh, yeah.
This sorrow, this troubledness?
Yeah. And it makes sense that he wants people with him. God doesn't operate alone.
Ooh.
Yeah. God operates with, those within God, obviously the Spirit and all that.
That's a good point.
And he created humanity to dwell with us.
Right.
God is a God of relationships.
Right.
And it's going to go away. So he goes and finds this. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to shift gears. I noticed you're taking a little, shifting gears, that's just deep, chilling stuff. But through what Jesus is going through, he still is looking out for his disciples.
Yes.
Verse 41 is not just, I don't think, a chastisement. I think he's genuine in his encouragement here that you need to be praying because there's going to be a very trying night ahead of you.
Yeah, they're going to have strong flesh and spirit and all of that.
If you're with me, then you need to be with me.
Yeah, and guess what? You are going to have temptation brought in front of you, and we're going to see before the end of this chapter, they will succumb to that temptation.
Yeah. I mean, they're
gone. Then he went away a second time and prayed, and the same thing happens. He went again praying, "My Father, if this cannot pass away unless I drink it," talking about that cup, what he's going to deal with, "your will be done." Same prayer, just worded a different way.
Also, he talked about Jesus being potentially just separated alone, right? But this also shows the love of God for us. To be able to sit here silent, assuming silent while Jesus is praying this prayer, knowing that Jesus himself is to suffer for me.
So think about this from a father's standpoint, too. God the Father is hearing the cries of his Son.
And purposely letting him
cry.
Mm.
And God so loved the world that he gave him, and that shows the seriousness and how much he loves us.
Right.
To not answer the prayers of his Son. Because you know what? I might have big plans to save the world, but if it meant to spare my son, I'd probably...
So we sing the song that he could have called 10,000 angels. God could have done it before Jesus even had the thought to call.
Yeah. And think about that in relation to, what we see with Abraham and Isaac. And that kind of, parallel in that Abraham only had one son. He loved his son, even though he knew that he had to do that because God had asked him to. It's almost the same we're seeing here, where God is replicating that same idea, where his son is crying out for his help, yet he's going to do what he knows needs to be done.
Yeah. There's a song that we sing, and we haven't sung in a long time before communion, "In Gethsemane Alone." And that's one of my favorite, before the Lord's Supper kind of songs. And it talks about him weeping here and alone in the garden and the emotion there. And it's heart-wrenching.
And even while we are still sleeping and unaware of what's going on, Jesus is suffering for us.
Yeah.
The disciples here, it was just, it was outside of their mind, outside of their immediate concerns, but Jesus was still going through that. The same for you and me, that even though it may be outside of our immediate concerns at a certain point in our time or our lives, Jesus still went through this knowing that Curtis I'm carrying Curtis's sins.
While he didn't even know, while he was still asleep.
Yeah, while I was still asleep.
Yeah. Again, he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. Flesh is weak, right? And he left them again and went away and prayed for a third time. So this time he finds them just asleep, and he leaves. And he goes back and prays a third time, saying the same thing once more. And I think there might be some symbolism there with the three idea too. Peter's going to deny him 3 times, 3 days, and that kind of idea too. But he came to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners." And in my mind, I picture, they probably hear the commotion now. People coming up to the Garden of Gethsemane, with the crowd and the soldiers and the torches and all that kind of stuff. Right. They hear it happening. Jesus knows it's coming. Of course, he's omniscient and knows all and everything. But he says, behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. It's happening right now. Get up, let us be going. Behold, the one who betrays me is at hand. The time has come. That betrayal that he predicted, his arrest, his death, and ultimately his resurrection is now about to happen. Now, the story is going to continue. We're going to see how awful the betrayal was. We're going to see how graphic the crucifixion was and how glorious the resurrection was. But this is where we see the last bit of, Jesus' ministry, I guess you'd say, interacting with people before now he goes to this trial and death. I think we'll stop there because we'll continue in next week into arrest and his trial and all of that. But I think we've used our time up for this. But what do you guys see here as we close out this section in verse 46? What's a lesson for us or a takeaway? And I know this is a solemn passage, but what's a takeaway for us?
Trying to think on how to word it, and I'll just throw it out there and let you clarify my thoughts for me. But don't fall. While I want to say don't fall asleep on Jesus, don't be surprised when we fall asleep on Jesus. Don't
be surprised when you're caught sleeping, when Jesus is caught caring. I mean, he's there caring for you. He's crying out. He's suffering anguish, and yet we get distracted. Hopefully our response would be, I'd be there with Jesus. But you know what? Even these amazing men here weren't. He did it alone for me. What do you think, Nick?
I think don't put so much stock in yourself.
Yeah.
Don't put, well, I'm this and I'm that and I'm this and I've done this and I've been this way. Rather put your stock in the one who's going to follow through. Listen to what, because I think as much as I think this is evidence of Jesus' leadership, I also think it's a failed example of self-leadership on the part of
disciples
of Peter, because he has built himself, and that's really what I look at when I look at this. When I'm looking at Peter, I'm seeing myself, and I'm listening to myself, because a lot of times I do the same thing. I won't do this, I won't do that, and then it happens.
And we have that generational arrogance. I would not make those same mistakes.
I wouldn't do that. My generation does it better than the generation before me, or the generation and I again, like I said, when I'm looking at Peter and I'm reading about Peter, I'm seeing myself, because I would have done the same thing.
The thought that scares me, and while I agree, I want to put myself in Peter's shoes. I don't think I would have been in Peter's shoes.
None of us can hold a candle to Peter kind of idea.
But I think I would have. I still would have shown up in what we've read tonight, but it'd be here in verse 45, when Jesus says, "The hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is to be betrayed in the hands of sinners." I'm afraid I would be in that crowd.
Yeah,
that I would be the one upset with Jesus coming here and disrupting my status quo.
Yeah, making me change, making me feel guilty.
I would be the ones that we would see here shortly yelling, "Crucify him, crucify him."
Right.
I don't think I'd be on his side. And that's a scary.
It is very scary. Yeah. And that's how these Gospels are designed, is for us to find ourselves in these characters and ask those questions. How would I respond to Jesus? Would I respond, my Lord, or would I respond negatively?
All the responses that we see often, because most of the responses that we see are often how we would respond to these different types of situations. When we see Jesus performing, if we saw Jesus performing a miracle, would be the people who are rejoicing at seeing this miracle, or would we be the people going, "Yeah, he's crazy. We got to kill him.
Yeah,
he's taking away our influence. We got to kill him."
And to not skip ahead, the book kind of culminates with the centurion saying, "Truly, this was the Son of God." Yeah. Hopefully, that would be us. But sadly, even those who were the closest to him weren't there when he declared himself and showed himself to be the Son of God.
And ultimately, these Gospels too, they teach us how to follow. They show us the failings of the first followers and show us through their failings how to follow Jesus. We rely on the Father. We rely on Jesus' leadership and what he did. And we try to emulate and reflect his character so that we can too be in a relationship with the Father like Jesus was. Not that we're ever going to get on that level, but the idea is the same. That we're to reflect his compassion, his character, his spirituality. I mean, all these things that we see, these characteristics, are the way that we're supposed to be.
Yes.
We should try to emulate those things.
No, I agree. Very good. We need to be like him in all aspects. Any final thoughts, gentlemen?
Cool section.
It is. It's amazing to see that Jesus also did this for us, and the Father was willing to sacrifice him for us too. So if you're tuning in at home, maybe even for the first time, I hope you got a glimpse into how amazing Jesus is.
Amen.
And spend time in the book of Matthew. Read about Jesus and learn about how he contrasts to the religious leaders of that day, to the religious leaders now, to any other belief system. Jesus is just truly amazing. And when you learn what he's done for us, you can't help but want to live for him. So thanks for tuning in tonight. Be online on the Zoom class Wednesday night at 7 o'clock. If you need the login, hit us up. And I'll see you either online or in person. Our next service is on Sunday. But thanks for tuning in. Have a good week.